Greetings everyone, this is Tactical Lich here and welcome to another Khorne Dog Army build video. And today we are facing off Kislev, bringing in a bunch of armored Corsairs and a bunch of cavalry in reserve. And of course for our side we are of course using the Khorne Dog build, the Fleshhounds of Khorne. 3 of them in fact in the air, again 2 Furies and the Hero Corps, a couple cultists with that Bloodletter summon, as well as a Herald of Khorne on a Juggernaut. Now for my opponent, we have Kislev here with a very elite infantry army with a bunch of armored Corsairs mixed in with great weapons variant, as well as a single Tsar Guard. They will be doing great work against the Khorne heavy infantry, especially when supported by Streltsy, the great axe gun infantry. Although, unfortunately again, we are not playing the heavy infantry game, instead the mobility game. And surprisingly, despite not being able to counter Kislev in terms of spawn camping, since Kislev do have some very powerful cavalry, especially with their bear riders, it's pretty hard to bog down the whole Kislev army in the deployment zone. Still, it is definitely feasible to pin down the Kislev cavalry, because in domination mode there are way too many choke points. Choke points here, and then other choke points over here. The whole map is filled with choke points, impassable terrain where your cavalry cannot pass through easily. It is rather limited for cavalry to use their mobility, use their speed to their advantage, especially when there's faster mobility, namely the Fleshhounds of Khorne. At 95 speed, the heavy cavalry of Kislev at 84 speed will have a rather tough time outrunning these dogs, and rather easy to be pinned in by either infantry or the Khorne doggos. Anyways, we will be beginning the battle right now, as the armies right now are maneuvering, trying to get into a better position to counteract the enemy offense. We have the dogs over here moving over, already close to their deployment zone, threatening to harass their missile troops and mobility, while there are some more Furies stationing in the middle, preparing to drop down, supporting the fight wherever it can go. And of course, we also have a very sneaky play here, hiding some dogs behind this huge giant column, and well, basically trying to sneak them through this back door and maybe get some rear charges once my opponent line up their infantry around this choke point and get some rear charges and whatnot. And so, as my opponent here, seeing my mobility is just circling, spreading out, they will be advancing in a rather tight formation here, not giving me a lot of space to go in for rear charges and whatnot. And the tight compact formation does do a lot of work in protecting themselves against the Furies, especially with all these missiles, the pistols, the Streltsy gun axes. They will shoot down Chaos Furies in a hurry. So I'm just pulling back, leaving my mobility in reserve, not really wanting to tassel with them. Especially with these Streltsy's 19 armor piercing missile strength, opening fire at my Fleshhounds, doing massive HP damage. Even with the physical resistance, the Fleshhounds are being forced back down to around 2/3 of their health. And so I will be pushing up some of my Bloodletters towards the choke point, trying to pressure my opponent's army to maybe bring some of their infantry to face towards this side. And especially over here we have a line of elite infantry, the Tsar Guards and the armored Corsairs with great weapons are lined up, with some more armored Corsairs in reserve, Streltsy aiming at this direction as well. Any advancing troops will get shot up, definitely. So basically I'm biding my time, hoping for my opponent to start pushing so I can get an opening and maybe sneak in my backdooring Fleshhound. Especially with my earlier advance of my other Khorne dogs, capturing my opponent's attention and some of their ammunition to the fleeing unit. Hopefully they will be forgetting about those Khorne dogs behind the pillar. And my opponent is also rather busy at the moment. They are spreading out their formations, setting up their army, readying for a push. And so I responded with a push of Bloodletters who got shot up pretty hard by all these Streltsys and armored Corsairs. And the Chaos Furies will be circling in, dropping down onto the Streltsy unit, silencing them. Over here we have some Tsar Guard pushing over, and the Streltsy also moving in, threatening to provide some flanking fire. So I will be dropping down some Chaos Furies, tying them down, although a counter charge from the winged lances will be dishing out massive pain against the Chaos Furies. Over here we have some Fleshhounds circling around the pillar and rear charging into the armored Cossars, while in the front, the great weapons armored Cossars are cut down by all my heroes, and the bloodletters, the armor-piercing anti-infantry, are so good at dealing with the elite infantry of Kislev. Zarguards will be coming in, as well as some of the cavalry, the Griffin Legion, very elite. But unfortunately, I do have my tactical reserve of pocket infantry, the bloodletter summons. And now with the Griffin Legion tied down in combat against the Fleshhounds, I'll be dropping in one unit right on top of these elite cavalry of Kislev, and they'll be flooding in from this warp gate, surrounding all these Griffin Legion, pinning them down in this choke point, preventing them from pulling out. My Fleshhounds who are in the middle objective has maneuvered themselves back to the rear of the Kislev forces, going to rear charge the Griffin Legion. Some winged lancers are coming in trying to support, but with some Fleshhounds of Khorne distracting them, they're now pinned in by the Khorne mobility as well, unable to support their infantry and Griffin Legion, who are in huge trouble as the bloodletters are now buffed up by the Horn of Khorne. The Griffin Legion are now being dragged down in prolonged combat as they are stuck between impassable terrain and enemy units. And on the far side, we have some bloodletters cutting their way through all these armored Cossars with great weapons. Some armored Cossars are positioning at the flanks, trying to firing into their rear and flanks, but my Fleshhounds and some more supporting Khorne warriors with halberds are pushing in more than enough to deal with all this Kislev infantry. Now back to the middle, we have some bloodletters intercepting the winged lancers, who just finished off the Furies on the Streltsy, trying to reinforce the middle fight, but unfortunately got caught because the choke point was just too narrow. And over here at this choke point, I summoned in yet another bloodletters of Khorne, right on top of these Starguards, and doing massive damage with that armor-piercing anti-infantry attack with the support of the Cousins of Khorne. And over here we have successfully forced off the Griffin Legion, and the Streltsy and Winged Lancers took some massive damage as well at the cost of a single bloodletter summon and some Fleshhounds. But now the Warbears are here to avenge their fallen brothers, coming in with a thunderous charge surrounding my characters, isolating them, which is a huge problem with their armor-piercing anti-large attacks. My Herald of Khorne surrounded is taking massive damage, but at the cost of the Herald, we are now pulling back some Fleshhounds and Furies, and now coming in with a rear charge, trying to use the high weapon strength and charge bonus of the Fleshhounds to dish out as much damage as possible on the armored bears. You can see that the impact damage, despite the heavy armor on the Warbears, is actually pretty serious against these Warbear riders, although they have got some massive damage, almost 1,200 value, but with a recharge from the Kiss Furies, especially pop with a Locust of Wrath, buffing their melee attack, they should be able to drag down these Warbear riders straight into the activation of the By Our Blood effect, making them temporarily unbreakable, but still putting him in even longer combat, dragging down their HP and more. Now over here, we have the initial unit of Streltsy now being caught by a bunch of Furies and Fleshhounds as the Kislev infantry are wearing thin, unable to protect the missile units. My mobility are now able to pick off all these stranded units of armored Cossars, Streltsys, and some of them are even dropping into the reinforcement zone, pinning down some freshly summoned Kislev infantry and delaying their advance. We have some extra armored Cossars with great weapons here, just basically trying to support the fight in the front line, but I'm now spawn camping here with the Chaos Furies pinning them down, while I have already summoned some Blood Crushers, crushing these Warbears. This time, pun totally intended. With the support of the Fleshhounds, all these Winged Lancers, Warbear Riders, and Patriarch are being pushed off, with only my Cultists of Khorne surviving. And now, in the middle objective, basically the whole objective is being mobbed up. I'm getting 2 cap from Objective 1 and Objective 2, leading ahead in terms of victory tickets. And now, with the supporting Chaos Warriors of Khorne with halberds cleaning up the Kislevite infantry, I'm capping Objective 3 as well, pushing for a free cap. And now with all these cost-effective trade I got from rear charges with the Fleshhounds and my Bloodletters, who are really good at killing off armored Cossars and Zarguards, I have the army advantage over my opponent. I'm now pushing straight for that spawn point here with the Blood Crushers, charging straight into the great weapon Cossars. The earlier Cossar reinforcement are still being tied down by my Fleshhounds, unable to support the front line. But my opponent here, due to that comeback advantage, does have enough resources to summon in some more Warbears. Now circling around, going for a rear charge on these Blood Crushers. The Blood Crushers are now in turn getting their blood crushed, paying the ultimate price, sacrificing themselves to give more blood to the Blood God. For Khorne does not care from whence the blood flows, only that it flows, and flow it did. And with such a scary force of cavalry and the snow leopard pushing out of the deployment zone, I decided it's time to tie them down in where they spawn and prevent them from supporting the fight. So more reinforcement of Bloodletters pushing forward. The Boyar is being tied down by the Fleshhounds of Khorne. There are some stranded armored Kossars who will be promptly pushed back, especially with the Fleshhounds here freed up and going for a charge. There's also an extra Bloodletter unit from the middle, depleted from the previous action, pushing straight for this little blob of cavalry and monsters and infantry, hoping to distract them as long as possible, paying the price of their lives, just to buy more time for all my units who have captured the objectives to trickle in more of that victory tickets. In response, our opponent is summoning even more Griffin Legion charging in, and with that devastating charge, no doubt they will be doing some massive damage, trying to break this unit of Bloodletters as soon as possible. But the Bloodletters are doing their best to dish out the damage against the armored units around the blob, especially with that Horn of Khorne buffing up their melee attack, although they are now crumbling due to the overwhelming presence of their opponent. But at this point, I am still free capping, and the Kislevite forces do not have any extra units and manpower to capture any of these objectives just yet. And I'll finally summon in another Zargard unit. They'll be pushing for the objectives, but it is a little bit too late, as I still have my infantry holding the objectives. I do not have that many forces due to the lack of reinforcement of the comeback mechanic, but still, with a speedy free cap, I was able to pull out ahead as my troops stuffing up all my opponent's forces in their deployment zone, bought enough time for the objectives to bring in the victory tickets, and I basically won by traffic jamming my opponent's deployment zone. Before we go into the army performances, let's just talk about how this Khorne Dog build can actually threaten the Kislev mobility game when Kislev supposedly have one of the best mobility with their winged lances, Griffin Legion, Bear Cavalry, and even war sleds. The problem isn't in the game mode. In fact, Kislev with one of the best mobility in-game is less affected by spawn camping and reinforcement abuse. The real problem is the maps. With all of the Domination game mode all focusing on holding choke points, putting a bunch of impassable terrain around the map, it is now harder than ever for cavalry units to perform a rear charge. More often than not, you need to go around a huge chunk of impassable terrain, go for a long detour, just to get behind an enemy unit deep inside enemy lines, exposing yourself to the risk of being countercharged and caught by enemy units just to deliver a rear charge on a unit protecting the choke point. Now the problem is with the lack of maneuvering space, it is much easier for a shock cav to get caught in these choke points, as there can always be faster mobility, like say the Slaanesh Cavalry, Khorne Dogs which are 95 speed, or Flyers, pinning down your winged lances who are only at 84 speed, and now your shock cav are unable to charge, unable to run, being dragged down by melee combat instead. Especially when your opponent is Khorne with Fleshhounds as an option. They are faster, they're also much tougher, not because they have heavy armor, but because with that 20% physical resistance able to help them mitigate that damage, as well as the fact that being demons they do not rout, and actually can hold in melee for much longer than regular mobility. So normally, depending on which mobility I have at hand, I'll either charge with the Fleshhounds, who is actually tough enough to hold down even Griffin Legion in melee combat, or I would drop down with the Chaos Furies, using the airdrop tactic to avoid being charged by the Kislevite shock cav. And then with the Kislev cavalry tied down, they are ripe for the taking in melee grind. Now other than the Kislev cavalry problem, there's also the heavy infantry and the missile infantry being rather vulnerable at spawn point, but that is basically similar to the Cathay issue, so I won't be talking about it that much. You can always deep strike Bloodletters to tie down their freshly spawned infantry like the armored Kossars, and especially with Bloodletters, armor piercing anti-infantry, they're extremely good at dealing with the armored Kossar units and the Zargards, very cost effective trade at that. You can also recharge the units freshly out of reinforcement with the Khorne Dogs and Furies, very standard spawn camping tactics. Now the only weakness to this Khorne Dog build I have found so far against Kislev is the cheese of Kislev war sled spam. they're certainly one of the most powerful units on the Kislev roster, having the potential to defeat the Khorne Dog cheese. Even then, I would say this build still counters the Warsled because, first of all, Khorne Dogs have physical resistance, mitigating the armor-piercing damage from the Warsleds, and secondly, they are large models, so the anti-infantry bonus doesn't work on these Khorne Dogs. And the mass of the chariot is not enough to pull through all these Khorne Dog models. And last but not least, Khorne Dogs are significantly faster than chariots only having 75 speed, while Khorne Dogs having 95. They can easily catch up with the Warsleds and pin them down in combat, just like this replay. I managed to get a surround with the Flash Hounds, pinning all these Warsled in place, and with my character supporting the fight, buffing out all these units with the Locust of Wrath, with the high weapon strength of single entities, and also the high weapon strength of the Flash Hounds themselves. The Warsleds are taking massive damage throughout the combat. So to sum up, Kislevite forces excels in open area, but unfortunately, the domination maps are all filled with choke points, and that allows our Flash Hounds of Khorne, who are decent enough in melee combat with their 20% physical resistance and that they do not rout, they can use their 95 speed to catch and pin down enemy cavalry, the Kislev Winged Lancers, Griffin Legion, in the choke point, preventing them from maneuvering around to the flanks and rear of the Khorne army, allowing more infantry, the characters, and even flyers to flood in, support the fight, grind down the Kislevite shock cav in hand-to-hand combat, preventing them from doing that shock damage with the charges. Even Warbear Riders, who are supposed to have devastating charge against the large targets, the Flash Hounds, with the 95 speed on the Flash Hounds, you can still easily run away with the Flash Hounds, and then once the Warbear Riders engage into melee combat against some other targets, say some Bloodletters of Khorne or the character squad, you can countercharge with the Flash Hounds into their rear and doing some decent damage with their 69 weapon strength. The same can be done to the Kislevite Warsled, where there is enough mass on these large Flash Hound models, and then finish them off in a melee grind. As for Kislev infantry, you can always rely on Bloodletters of Khorne. They do have some really cost-effective armor-piercing anti-infantry weapon strength, able to cut through all these Sargods, the Streltsy, the Armored Kossars, who are the main staying power in the Kislevite roster. Honestly, you don't really need anything else, especially because due to the armor piercing on the Bloodletters, even cavalry like the Griffin Legion will take significant damage if they're engaging against these demons of Khorne. And with that 20% physical resistance and the lack of routing in these units, they can actually hold the line quite well as long as they're not being shot up by arrows and gunpowder. So basically distract your opponent's missile infantry with your Furies or your other mobilities like Chaos Warhounds or the Khorne Dogs, and the Bloodletters will cut their way through all of the Kislevite armored infantry. And of course, you can always rely on the good old Bloodletter summon, dumping them right on top of your opponent's armor-piercing infantry or their armored Kossars, their Streltsy, basically tying down your opponent's unit with your damage dealer unit summon. And if possible, you can always shove all your forces into your opponent's deployment zone, occupying your opponent with a lot of units to kill, buying time for your other units to capture objectives, or simply allow the objectives to top up your victory tickets. Just like what I did in the battle replay, winning by causing a traffic jam in my opponent's deployment zone, where my opponent's Warbear Riders and the Griffin Legion are all occupied in some rather tattered Bloodletters, Chaos Furies, as well as my one single Cultist of Khorne, not being able to finish them in time and push up to the objectives to secure the victory tickets. The problem isn't in the domination mode's reinforcement or the combat mechanic, nor is it on the Kislevite roster, but more on the map designs for domination. With that many choke points, impassable terrain, shock cav simply do not have the room for maneuver to position into a flanking attack or rear charge, and they are just more easily bogged down in melee combat by different forms of mobility, making microing cavalry a much harder effort than it was on land battles, essentially limiting their effectiveness in domination. And the solution to this is rather simple. Just bring more open maps, more variety of maps onto Domination, and it should no longer be a problem. And yeah, that's basically it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do and want to see more, do remember to subscribe and like this video to get notified. Next time I will be doing a video about kiting Khorne with this Khorne Doggo build. Yes, it will be Khorne Civil War, and I'll be pulling a rather controversial move, possibly breaking old tournament rules in Total War Warhammer 2. Not that I think that cheesing is the best way to do everything, but more of, I think that Domination mode isn't as cheese-proof as a lot of people claim it to be. And I want to see everyone's opinion on whether Domination actually need rules moderation, like old Warhammer 2 tournaments on land battles. So if you're interested, remember to keep an eye out on my channel on the latest video uploads. And if you have any battle replays, land battles, Domination, even Warhammer 2 replays, feel free to send any of them to me. I'll check them out and see if I can make them into a video. And yeah, that's basically it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.